There are moments in a pilot's life when everything you've learned, all your experience, and every hour of training comes down to a few crucial minutes. This is the story of one of those nights I'll never forget. My name is Robert Matthews. I'm 42 years old, and I've been commanding commercial aircraft for almost 2 decades. I've flown over every continent, faced severe storms, heavy turbulence, and even some minor emergency landings. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that Tuesday night in March on flight AZ447 from Los Angeles to Miami. It was 11:15 p.m. when we took off from Los Angeles International Airport. I was commanding an Airbus A330-300, one of the most reliable aircraft in commercial aviation, with my first officer, Frank Sullivan, beside me, an excellent professional I'd flown with dozens of times. Our crew was complete. 3 experienced flight attendants and a purser who knew that route like the back of her hand. On board we were carrying 180 passengers, families returning from vacation, executives on business trips, students heading for study abroad programs. Regular people, like you and me, trusting their lives to our professionalism. It was a responsibility I took very seriously, as always. The flight was proceeding normally. We had crossed over the southwestern United States without any issues, flown over the crystal clear waters of the Caribbean under a clear, starlit sky. We were at 37,000 feet altitude, flying at Mach 0.82, with all systems functioning perfectly. The autopilot was engaged. The Rolls-Royce Trent 700 engines were humming smoothly, and I was taking the opportunity to review approach procedures for Miami, still 2 hours away. Frank was checking weather conditions at our destination when it happened. 11:47 p.m., a deafening blast shook the entire aircraft. It wasn't just any noise. It was the sound of metal being torn apart, of components being ejected at hundreds of miles per hour, of an explosion that made the whole plane vibrate as if we'd been struck by lightning. For a split second, I thought maybe we had collided with something, but at 37,000 feet altitude that was impossible. Immediately, a cascade of alarms began sounding in the cockpit. Red lights flashed across the entire panel, and the master warning blared incessantly. My heart raced, but my training took over. 2 decades of experience made me react instinctively. "Frank, disconnect the autopilot," I shouted, taking manual control of the aircraft. The first indicator I saw chilled my blood. ENG2 fire, engine 2 on fire, but that wasn't all. The right engine had literally exploded. Metal fragments had damaged part of the wing, hydraulic systems were compromised, and most frightening, our fuel indicator showed a steep drop. "Mayday, mayday, mayday!" Frank shouted into the radio, while I fought to maintain control of the aircraft. "Caracas Control, AZ447, engine emergency, requesting vectors to nearest airport." The Venezuelan controller's voice responded immediately, professional and calm. "AZ447, Caracas Control, Mayday understood. Confirm your position and nature of emergency." "Caracas Control, AZ447, 180 nautical miles northeast of Caracas. We've had right engine explosion, possible fuel leak, 180 people on board, requesting direct vector to nearest airport." While Frank communicated with control, I executed the emergency procedures I knew by heart. First, I cut fuel to engine 2 and activated the fire suppression system. The fire alarm stopped, but our problems were just beginning. Checking the systems, I discovered the explosion had damaged more than I'd imagined. We had lost one of the 3 hydraulic systems, which meant some flight controls wouldn't respond normally. Worse still, we were losing fuel at an alarming rate. If my calculations were correct, we had at most 15 minutes before running out of power to keep essential systems functioning. AZ447, Caracas Control, Simón Bolívar Airport is 185 nautical miles southwest of your position. Cleared immediate descent to flight level 250 and heading 240 degrees. Caracas Control, AZ447, we don't have 185 miles of range. Need something closer, urgent. There was a pause that seemed like an eternity. Every second counted now. AZ447 checking. Palomar Airport, Margarita Island, is 95 nautical miles southeast. Runway 0927, 7874 feet long. That's your best option. Palomar, I knew that airport. I had landed there a few times during my career, But never in a situation like this. The runway was sufficient for an A330, but it would be tight, especially considering we'd be landing with only one engine and compromised systems. "Frank, you familiar with Port Lamar?" I asked while initiating an emergency descent. "Landed there 3 times, short runway, but doable. The problem will be the approach with one engine." He was right. Landing an A330 with only one engine functioning is one of the most complex procedures in commercial aviation. The aircraft tends to yaw toward the side of the failed engine, requiring constant correction with the rudder. Additionally, the approach speed would be higher, increasing the distance needed to stop. While descending, I took the opportunity to make an announcement to the passengers. I knew they had felt the explosion and heard the alarms. It was important to keep them calm, but also prepare them for what was coming. "Attention passengers, this is your captain speaking. We've had a technical problem with one of our engines and, as a precaution, we're going to make an unscheduled landing at Port Lamar Airport in Venezuela. The situation is under control, but for safety, I ask that you follow the flight attendant's instructions carefully. We'll be on the ground in approximately 12 minutes. I tried to keep my voice calm and confident, but inside I knew the next few minutes would be the most challenging of my career. Our purser, Michelle, appeared at the cockpit door. "Captain, how should I proceed with the cabin?" "Michelle, prepare for emergency landing. Brace positions, remove loose objects, make sure all passengers have their seatbelts fastened, and prepare for a possible rapid evacuation on the ground." She nodded professionally and returned to the cabin. I heard her voice over the PA system, beginning to instruct passengers about safety positions. Time was running out rapidly. Our fuel continued leaking, and I could see from the instruments that levels were dangerously low. Worse still, we started having electrical problems. Some panel lights began flickering intermittently, a sign that the damaged engine's generator had stopped working, and we were depending only on power from the left engine and emergency batteries. As 447, Caracas Control, fire trucks and ambulances are being positioned at Port Lamar. Confirm souls on board. Caracas Control, ACE 447, we confirm 180 passengers plus 5 crew members, total 185 souls on board. The word souls always gave me chills. It was the technical term used in emergencies, but carried a terrible symbolic weight. 185 souls depended on my decisions in the next few minutes. We reached 15,000 feet when we received the vector to Port Lamar. Through the windscreen, I could already see the lights of Margarita Island approaching. It was a comforting sight, but I knew the hardest part was still to come. "Frank, review the single-engine approach procedures with me." Approach speed, 155 knots instead of the usual 140. Limited flap configuration to avoid asymmetry. Continuous rudder use to compensate for right yaw tendency. Maximum auto brake after touchdown. Perfect. And if we can't stop on the runway? 90 meters of safety area past the end of the runway, then vegetation and a road. It wasn't the ideal scenario, but we had options. The important thing was to get the aircraft on the ground safely. Port Lamar Tower contacted us. AZ447, Port Lamar Tower, runway 09er in use, wind calm, QNH 1013, cleared for emergency approach, runway 09er. Port Lamar Tower, AZ447, cleared for emergency approach, runway 09er, QNH 1013. I initiated the final approach. At 5,000 feet, I configured flaps to 15 degrees, less than normal to avoid creating more asymmetric drag. The aircraft was heavy, still with a lot of fuel we couldn't burn due to the time shortage. That's when the second problem appeared. At 3,000 feet, our cabin lights flickered and went out for a few seconds. We were losing electrical power faster than expected. If the electrical system failed completely during approach, we'd lose navigation instruments, runway lights, and even power-assisted brakes. "Frank, we have electrical problems. Monitor backup instruments." Backup systems confirmed, but emergency battery shows only 8 minutes of power remaining. 8 minutes, that was exactly the time we needed to complete the approach and landing. There was no margin for error. At 2,000 feet, I could clearly see Port Lamar's illuminated runway ahead of us. It looked smaller than I remembered, but it was our only option. Emergency vehicle lights were already positioned along the runway, ready for any eventuality. AZ-447 Porlamar Tower, confirm landing gear down and locked. I looked at the panel. 2 green lights confirmed the main gear was down, but the nose gear light was flashing amber. Another problem. Porlamar Tower, AZ-447, main gear confirmed down and locked. Nose gear indication questionable. AZ-447, understood. Fire department reports nose gear appears to be in correct position visually. It was temporary relief, but I knew we could have steering problems on the ground if the nose gear wasn't completely functional. At 1,000 feet, I executed the final checklist. Speed stabilized at 155 knots. Landing configuration confirmed. Emergency systems ready. Frank was beside me, monitoring every instrument, ready to take control if necessary. 500 feet on glide path, he announced. This was it. Everything depended on the next 30 seconds. The aircraft was heavy and with only one engine, making the approach more unstable. I had to make constant corrections with the rudder to maintain alignment with the runway. My left hand controlled the power lever of the functioning engine, while my right firmly held the control stick. 100 feet, 50 feet, 30 feet. I cut power and gently raised the nose for the flare. The A330 touched the runway with a harder impact than usual, characteristic of single-engine landings, but we were on the ground. Maximum reverse, maximum brakes, I shouted, engaging all available braking systems. The aircraft decelerated but slowly. Through the windscreen, I saw the runway end lights approaching rapidly. 500 meters, 300 meters, 100 meters. We stopped just 50 meters from the runway end. For a few seconds, the cockpit was silent, except for the sound of engines being shut down and systems being turned off. Frank and I looked at each other, breathing heavily. "Excellent work, Captain," he said, his voice choked with emotion. But our work wasn't finished yet. We needed to evacuate the passengers quickly. The damaged engine still presented fire risk, and our aircraft was in a vulnerable situation. Porlamar Tower, AZ-447 on ground safely, requesting external aircraft inspection and emergency vehicles in position. AZ-447, understood. Fire department approaching for inspection. Congratulations on excellent work. Michelle appeared at the cockpit door again. "Captain, passengers are calm but anxious. How should I proceed?" "Let's wait for the fire department inspection. If everything's safe, normal deplaning. If there's any sign of danger, emergency evacuation." The next few minutes were tense. Through the windows, we saw firefighters inspecting the damaged engine with thermal equipment. Finally, the fire chief communicated with us via radio. AZ-447, external inspection complete. Engine 2 shows no signs of fire or overheating. Cleared for normal deplaning. It was the most relieving moment of my life. The deplaning proceeded normally. One by one, the 180 passengers left the aircraft, many of them approaching the cockpit to thank us. An elderly lady held my hand and said, "Thank you for bringing us home safely." A businessman commented that he'd never complain about turbulence again. A child asked if I was a superhero. I'm not a superhero. I'm just a pilot who did what I was trained to do. But that night, training, experience, and maybe a little luck combined to prevent a tragedy. The subsequent investigation revealed that the engine had suffered a catastrophic turbine disc failure, causing an explosion that damaged hydraulic systems and punctured the right-wing fuel tank. It was exactly the type of emergency we practice in the simulator, but hope never to face in real life. Frank and I spent 3 days in Porlamar, awaiting the arrival of a rescue aircraft. During that time, we had several conversations about what happened that night. He told me something I'll never forget. "Captain, in 15 minutes you made decisions that saved 185 lives. That's something few people can say in life. Today, almost 2 years later, I still fly commercially. That experience didn't traumatize me. On the contrary, it gave me even more confidence in modern aviation and the training we receive. Of course, whenever I hear the engines humming during a flight, I remember that night, but not with fear, with gratitude. Gratitude for the technology that allowed an aircraft with catastrophic failure to remain flyable. Gratitude for the training that prepared me for a situation I hoped never to face. Gratitude for the fantastic team that worked with me that night, and especially gratitude for being able to take 180 people home safely. Many people ask me if I felt fear that night. The honest answer is, of course I did. Any normal person would feel fear in a situation like that, but fear can't paralyze a pilot. Fear needs to be channeled to increase focus, accelerate reasoning, and intensify determination. What gave me strength to continue were the faces of the passengers I saw during the safety briefing before takeoff. Families with children, elderly couples, young people full of dreams. Each of them trusted their lives to me, and I couldn't disappoint that trust. Commercial aviation is today the safest means of transportation in the world. Statistically, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than to be involved in an aviation accident. But when something goes wrong up there, at 37,000 feet altitude and hundreds of miles from any airport, every second counts, every decision matters, and every crew member needs to give their best. That March night, we had our trial by fire, and we passed. I can't say it was easy. I can't say I didn't feel the weight of responsibility, but I can say with certainty that I'd do it all again exactly the same way, to ensure that each of those 185 people made it home safely. Because that's what we do. We're not heroes. We don't have superpowers. We're trained professionals with reliable equipment and tested protocols. But above all, we're people who take very seriously the responsibility of transporting other people through the skies. Those 15 minutes changed my perspective on many things. They made me value even more every smooth flight, every gentle landing, every "have a good trip" from the cabin crew. They made me realize that behind every commercial flight exists a complex network of professionals dedicated to passenger safety. They also made me reflect on the fragility and, at the same time, the resilience of human life. In a matter of seconds, 185 lives were in danger. But also in a matter of minutes, through teamwork, training, and determination, all those lives were preserved. If you're listening to this story during a flight, look out the window. See the vastness of the sky, the curvature of the earth, the lights of the cities below. Think about the miracle of flying at almost 600 miles per hour, suspended miles high, transported by an incredible machine operated by dedicated professionals. Aviation isn't just about technology, it's about people. People who design safer aircraft, who maintain them in perfect condition, who control air traffic, who serve coffee at 33,000 feet, and who, when necessary, do the impossible to ensure everyone gets home. That night over the Caribbean, when the engine exploded and we had only 15 minutes to save 180 people, it wasn't a miracle that saved us. It was the perfect combination of training, technology, teamwork, and yes, a little luck. But mainly it was the determination to never give up, not for a single second. Because up there, at tens of thousands of feet altitude, when everything goes wrong, when alarms sound and red lights flash, there is no plan B. There's only plan A. Do everything right on the first try because there's no second chance. And when you succeed, when you put that aircraft on the ground safely and see 180 people walking away from the aircraft on their own legs, carrying their carry-on bags and hugging their loved ones, well, there's no feeling like it in the world. That's why I fly. That's why, even after that terrible and wonderful night at the same time, I continue climbing into those cockpits, checking those instruments, talking with air traffic controllers using the phonetic alphabet we know by heart. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot. That's why every time I announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for landing," I feel a renewed responsibility. Because I know what it really means to have 180 lives in your hands. I know the weight of that responsibility, but I also know the incomparable satisfaction of honoring it. Today, when young pilots ask me about that night, I always say the same thing. I hope you never go through something like that, but if you do, remember that you were trained for it. Trust the training, trust the aircraft, trust the team, and especially trust yourselves. Because sometimes between life and tragedy, there's only one pilot doing what they know how to do best. And 15 minutes that can seem like an eternity, but that decide the fate of hundreds of people. I had my 15 minutes, and thank God all 180 passengers also had theirs, but on the safe side of the story. And you know what's most incredible? The next day, some of those passengers took other flights to continue their journeys, because they understood that what happened that night wasn't a failure of aviation, but proof of its safety. Proof that even when everything goes wrong, there are people prepared to make everything right. That's the confidence I want you to have in aviation. And if someday you're on a flight and hear those engines humming smoothly, remember that there's someone in the cockpit who would take 15 minutes to save your lives if necessary. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. We're the guardians of the skies, and our mission is simple: take you home safely no matter what happens. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real accounts from the skies, subscribe to the Black Box channel and hit the notification bell. Each episode brings a new true story, told by those who lived these unique experiences in the heights. Leave a comment telling us if you've ever experienced an emergency situation on a flight, and share this video with someone you think should know the behind the scenes of aviation. Until the next account, keep your seatbelts fastened and keep flying.